Hello and welcome back to the Political Dispatch, the podcast that explores big ideas and policies that are shaping our world.
I'm Lily Mott.
I'm Sid Kurapati.
And I'm Tom Spare.
Today, we're diving deep into a topic that's been making headlines and raising eyebrows across the United States: the evolving and often contentious relationship between Donald Trump and the media. From major network cancellations to quiet newsrooms, something significant is shifting.
Exactly, Lily. For decades, the US media landscape has operated under certain assumptions, but increasingly, we're seeing these foundations shaken, often with financial and political tremors emanating directly from the highest offices.
And we're going to explore what these recent developments, particularly those involving Donald Trump, tell us about the state of media accountability, institutional authority, and indeed the very nature of democracy in the US today. Let's kick things off with a recent bombshell that sent ripples through the entertainment and news industries: CBS's cancellation of The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. After 50 years, a late-night institution with a legacy spanning Johnny Carson and David Letterman is being axed. This is despite Stephen Colbert's show consistently topping ratings, generating a significant ad revenue, and its clips racking up millions of views online. So why the cancellation? So one of the reasons that Paramount, which is the owner of CBS, has decided to cancel it is saying that there's sort of financial issues, basically, surrounding the cancellation of the Colbert Show. But it hits like top ratings. And the gap in its finances is basically a load of money it's paid off to Donald Trump in a legal dispute. So conveniently, it means that the Colbert Show is having to be, or the late night show is having to be cancelled. However, just a week before CBS's parent company, Paramount, announced an $8 billion merger with Skydance, Paramount settled a legal dispute with Donald Trump. It raises the question, was this purely a financial decision, or was there a political undercurrent to appease powerful figures during a critical business deal? What we're witnessing here isn't just about ratings or mergers. It touches upon deeper concerns about the role of the media in democracy. This brings to mind the work of the Frankfurt School, particularly thinkers like Adorno and Horkheimer, who coined the term the culture industry. They argued that popular culture, driven by commercial interests, produces standardized content that pacifies audiences and reinforces dominant ideologies. Is the cancellation of a critically acclaimed, top-rated show like Colbert's, especially in the wake of a settlement with a powerful political figure, an example of this culture industry at work, prioritizing corporate appeasement over critical discourse?
That is a fascinating connection, and it makes you wonder about the pressure points in these massive media conglomerates, especially which this is something that I feel like always needs to be reinforced. These are all businesses that are competing with one another at the end of the day. So none of this is publicly funded. These are all independent businesses. So what about other examples of some of these media giants that seem to be treading carefully around Trump? What are some ideas that you guys have?
Yeah, great question, Lily. So I think we should consider the Wall Street Journal. It's owned by Rupert Murdoch, a billionaire media mogul whose relationship with Trump has been famously fractured. Yet the Journal recently published a story directly linking Trump to Jeffrey Epstein. While it was reported, the context of Murdoch's ownership and their complicated history adds another layer to how these stories are handled. So we can give the example of the Colbert Show, which is incredibly critical of anyone, really. You know, they're not scared to, Stephen Colbert's monologues cover lots of different aspects of US and world affairs. Sort of a really important way in which everyday Americans can get hold of the news and be critical thinkers. And on the other side of it, we have to rely on billionaires like Rupert Murdoch to hold Donald Trump accountable when it's really just up to the whim of Murdoch. You know, a lot of his editors and other people in the Wall Street Journal were like, I don't think we should be doing this. And Murdoch's like, we're going to do it anyway. So a lot of this can be overruled by the owners who, Murdoch is rich and powerful enough to stand up to Trump. But it's like we're reliant on Murdoch intervening when in the past he's done completely the opposite and sort of gone on a different approach. And it's worth bearing in mind that Rupert Murdoch used to own Fox News, for example. So, he doesn't exactly have a consistent track record in his approach to Trump. A lot of it is tactical. A lot of it is very, very politicized. So it sort of brings into question all of that.
Absolutely, Tom. It's hard to imagine that a guy like Rupert Murdoch is actually holding Trump to account. So, like, the question in my mind is, what does the world come to? But there's another example, right? That's the Washington Post, which is owned by Jeff Bezos, who himself reportedly met with Trump before the 2024 elections and apparently has even donated funds to him. And in the past, we've seen how the Post has been a really powerful voice, which has held presidents and administrations to account time and again. They've also been kind of adapted to different kinds of films and so on. But today we see a very different kind of a Washington Post. And it's been surprisingly quiet. And in fact, some of it has also been very pro Trump oriented reporting that has been happening. And it didn't even endorse any particular candidate also. So this silence from such a prominent and a very vocal newspaper is very unusual. It certainly fueled speculation about Bezos's potential appeasement of Trump. But it makes me think once again that what is this bargaining chip that Trump has that has just, he's got the stranglehold on every one of them.
Yeah, exactly. And it's worth bearing in mind that the Washington Post is the paper that brought down Richard Nixon, so it's sort of come a long way. It's gone on a journey, as you would say. And these aren't isolated instances either. What we're seeing is a pattern where major media players, from legacy networks to influential newspapers, appear to be navigating a complex landscape where financial interests, corporate mergers, and personal political relationships intersect with their journalistic responsibilities. It raises a critical question: is this a watering down of accountability?
And if we move on from the commercial pressures, let's take a look at the direct actions taken by the US government and the Trump administration as well regarding the media. The US government recently announced measures to defund public service radio and media, cutting funding to institutions like NPR and even beloved TV shows like Sesame Street. And in the US, we don't have that much public funding for media, to be clear, so kind of already hitting at an institution that already doesn't have a lot of support. And also Sesame Street, just very sad. That hits a chord for everyone. This isn't just about budget cuts. It's about signaling a clear intent to reduce the reach and influence of publicly funded media.
And it goes beyond funding. And in fact, just a couple of months back, Trump's press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, announced significant changes to the White House press corps. This included replacing the established media names with new media like podcasts. The Associated Press, which is a cornerstone of American journalism, was even banned from certain parts of the White House, we've never seen something like that happen. And this is very clearly a direct attempt to control the narrative and circumvent traditional journalistic gatekeepers, which, it just leaves so many questions and a lot of disappointment.
This is a really critical point, Sid. So PEN America highlighted this, noting that such moves by the White House to choose its own press pool should be alarming, as it undermines the independent role of the press. When a government begins to handpick who gets access and who doesn't, it blurs the lines between reporting and propaganda. And I suppose to an extent, this has existed on a more subtle basis. So the president addressing the White House press corps, its frequency has changed over time. For example, Joe Biden really didn't make many public appearances, particularly near the end of his presidency. So even the president's absence is a statement in itself, and how much access the president gives to newspapers. but also who's picked to ask the questions too. So, is it regularly rotating, or are they picking particularly sort of favorable media outlets? And it's sort of worth bearing in mind how that's changed over time, how uh, the media environment's changed too. So obviously, a lot of people are accessing media in different ways. It's a lot more fractured. I think it's worth bearing in mind that the press corps basically has existed since the 1930s in the White House in its current form. So it hasn't the core uh, of the press, which is reporting from the White House, has really remained unchanged for a large chunk of time. So we have to go back to Roosevelt when that started. And a lot of the things that Trump's changing is basically changing a lot of what Roosevelt's vision of America was. It's more liberal, open-minded, more sort of internationally facing, sort of using government to help the poor, trying to be more accountable, trying to get the economy a bit more sort of working for the people rather than private interest. So yeah, there's just some thoughts there.
Yeah, and I do think this strategy is about bypassing scrutiny and fostering a media environment that is more amenable to the administration's message. I think for me as a podcaster and with Be the Change Media Network in mind, it's promising to see new media being treated as more established and respectable forms of media. However, that leaves the door open to citizen journalists being in the White House and influencers being in the White House and podcasters who might not have trained as journalists, which you don't always have to, but I think when you're thinking about seats in the White House, that's probably something that I would prefer. I'll just put that out there as an I statement. But I would prefer to have people who went to journalism school reporting on what's coming out of the White House, or just have some form of training. So I'll put that out there. Anyways, it's a clear move, I think, in my mind, towards controlling the flow of information, reminiscent of tactics seen in more authoritarian regimes. So yeah, it's concerning.
Totally, Lily. And this basically leads us to how Donald Trump is increasingly relying on his own media platforms and the influential billionaire allies that he has. Trump now heavily uses Truth Social, his own social media platform. And between Jan and June 2025 alone, he's posted over 2,100 times on the platform. Where does he have that time? And what this basically allows him is to communicate directly with his base, unfiltered by traditional media, and to control his message entirely.
And it's not just Truth Social. During the US presidential election, Trump received significant financial support from tech billionaire Elon Musk. More strikingly, he was seemingly given preferential treatment on Musk's social platform, X. This creates a powerful echo chamber and amplifies his voice, while potentially suppressing dissenting views, fundamentally altering the information ecosystem for millions.
And we've done previous episodes on this too, so we'll put links in episodes that we've sort of focused more on the media, and particularly around Facebook and Meta, as well as X. The involvement of these tech billionaires who control platforms that are effectively the new public square raises serious questions about media impartiality and the potential for selected information dissemination. When the owners of dominant social media platforms align with political figures, it can severely impact the fairness and balance of public discourse. But then we also have to think about the devices which we're getting access to as well. So there's actually a growing conversation about how teens shouldn't really be having access to social media in the same way, because we don't actually know what the long-term impact of that could be, because social media has only existed really for the last 20 years, but in its current form, it's relatively new in how it's changing in terms of like video content, in terms of how the different social media platforms are owned, and the media concentration of that. So There are potential links, for example, between social media use and isolation. And it's a telling sign that lots of people in Silicon Valley were not allowing their kids to use phones and to use social media. But they're fine with allowing poorer kids to have access to these things. They're fine using lots of different sort of forms of media in the classroom, for example. So yeah, there's a lot of questions to be raised there.
So yeah, in a sense, if we had to give a nutshell of the whole thing, the commercial pressures on traditional media, the government's attempt to defund and control the press access, and Trump's reliance on his own platforms and his billionaire friends, what we're basically witnessing is a profound transformation that isn't just a political battle. It's a battle for the very soul of journalistic independence and accountability.
To reiterate the point I made at the top of the show, the media landscape where major outlets seem to bow to Trump is the most recent instance of companies and institutions across the US, from universities to legal firms, appearing to appease the president. It represents a troubling trend, a watering down of accountability, institutional authority, and intimidation seen more in authoritarian regimes than democratic ones.
It's a stark reminder of how fragile these institutions can be when faced with concerted pressure, whether financial, political, or social. So, what does this all mean for the average citizen trying to get unbiased information? Which feels like that feels like a very, very what does unbiased information even mean anymore? But, anyways, that's another episode.
Yeah, and what role do we as consumers of media play in this? Is it about seeking out diverse sources, supporting independent journalism, or holding these powerful entities accountable through public pressure? The implications for a well-informed citizenry are massive.
And ultimately, the questions we need to ask are, what is the true purpose of a free press in a democracy? And what happens when that freedom is constantly challenged, not just by external forces, but by internal pressures and strategic maneuvers from those in power? So basically, when CBS makes that decision, it's a sort of short-term form of appeasement, but then that comes at a significant cost. It's not something that can be immediately measured. You'll have less views. Well, you won't have anyone seeing Stephen Colbert's monologues, and there's not like a ticker tape sort of measure at the bottom saying every person that views this thing means they're more informed. You can't actually see the direct implication of consuming that. So it's a lot more insidious, and we probably won't see the implications of this for a while yet.
And with all of those thoughts and those questions for the listeners to ponder, because we don't have all the answers, that brings us to the end of another episode of the Political Dispatch. It's a very complex and concerning picture that we've hopefully painted a little bit, but I feel like we did leave people with more questions than answers, and that's okay this time. It's definitely one that demands our attention.
You can find us wherever you found this episode. Please like, subscribe, and share our show so we can continue to reach more people and drive up interest in these vital conversations.
I'm Lily Munt.
I'm Tom Spare.
And I'm Sid Kurupati. You've been listening to the Political Dispatch.